Good morning. Just like the last time I went live, I just wanted to do this devotion publicly. Um, it's not that I have something to teach. I'm not here as a teacher. Just here as a friend, and I'm sharing what I'm doing. Um, when I read the Bible, I really at this point only read the words of Jesus. There's so much there, and there's so much there in just a single verse that really I could just always use the same verse from Matthew 5. And from my experience sitting with these verses, my experience meditating on these verses, trying to live these verses, um, a single verse is enough. The rest of the Sermon on the Mount is contained in a single verse. It just kind of flows out. I don't want to say logically flows forth, though there's probably some logic there. But internally, it logically flows. So Matthew 5:4 is where we are today. So what I'm going to invite you to do with me is open your heart, however you do that. I'm also not going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to talk about what I do, but that's only because it's what I'm doing. I'm here on YouTube sharing. So I'm going to talk about what I do, but I'm not trying to say this is the right way to do it. It's an option. So if you want to try this option, feel free to follow along. For some, um, a prayer using words is going to be the way to open the heart. And maybe that prayer is something along the lines of, God, I open myself. I open myself to hear that still small voice. Please help me listen. To get quiet, to allow the mind to tone down. To allow the history of this life in this body to tone down. To tone down what I've heard from other people. Just help me to get quiet and hear your voice. Your voice alone. And for me, my preferred way of getting there, of getting to that place of hearing the voice of the one, is to just get quiet. So I'm going to do that now. And there's not really a technique here, not so much. In some traditions, they'll focus on the breath, focus on some other object. It's great. But for me, I just allow everything to settle, to come down a notch or two. It really does feel like things shift down physically in the body. They shift down, especially in the mind. Things come down. I even feel a little bit heavier, pleasantly heavy. Get a little firmer in my seat. It's like there's a magnet that's been turned on. Feel solid. The thoughts, maybe they don't stop, but they slow and come down. It's kind of like a pond. If you throw a rock into the middle of it, the disturbance spreads out to the edges, and we're left with glassy stillness. For me, this is where the still small voice is speaking. My experience is God is always speaking, but Am I listening? Or am I thinking? I know this is the way it is. This is the way it has to be. This is the way I've been told it is. Am I coming from that place of ego that I know the truth? Because that place is incompatible with hearing the voice of God. Yes, sometimes when we come from that place of knowingness, apparent knowingness, of ego, God's voice still speaks. But then what tends to happen for me is if I'm coming from that place of knowingness, I know how it is. God speaks. Yes, I hear God. But then after the fact, mind is going to interpret and change and make sure that what God is telling me fits into this pattern that I come to expect. My expectations will alter the words. And that's part of the reason I don't always use the word God. There is so much packed into that word. So sometimes I'll say the one. Sometimes I don't use a word at all. This isn't a tradition. This isn't a religion. This isn't even a spiritual practice. This is just getting quiet. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So now I just listen. It's not a process in the head where I'm thinking, well, if this, then that. Oh, this was said in another chapter, another verse. Not like that. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. There's that simple, straightforward interpretation, which is beautiful. Those who mourn will be comforted. Those who have suffered loss will be comforted. Beautiful. It's not where I'm drawn today, though. What's impressed in my heart is more in what mourning stands in contrast to. If I mourn, if I really weep, if I allow the full expression of that experience of sadness, what does that stand in contrast to? As a child, I suffered the loss of great grandparents. I really have not experienced a lot of death in my life. But losing those great grandparents and then my mom's parents as an adult, I believe I was in my early 20s for my mom's parents. When my great grandfather died, the first death I experienced in my life, and I must have been 4 or 5, thinking around 5. I remember just being somewhat confused and in understanding that I should feel sad, but not quite sure what to do. Later, the later deaths I experienced, so much later in teen years, other grandparents died, or great grandparents died. Then when my mother's parents died, it wasn't, I didn't feel anything or much. I didn't feel much of anything. I didn't cry. And it wasn't because I didn't love my grandparents. It wasn't because I didn't know how you're expected to behave. I just didn't, that emotion didn't come up and I didn't understand why. And now looking back, I think I see it, especially here in this place listening. What does mourning stand opposed to? We use words to distinguish, to point. So why mourning? What is the opposite? What are we doing if we're not mourning? Well, I certainly wasn't mourning. I certainly wasn't mourning in those teen years with deaths that happened with great grandparents. I certainly wasn't mourning in my 20s when my mom's parents died. Frankly, and it doesn't have to do so much with that loss. It's really the rest of my life at that time. But I was just kind of numb to that loss. I wanted to be numb to the pain that was inside of me at that time. I wanted to forget. I wanted to to stop hurting. Life was becoming unmanageable for me. And it was unmanageable many, many times in my 20s. Frankly, it got worse in my 30s and really came to a head in my 40s. And I think I just didn't have capacity. I didn't have capacity to mourn in those early years. At 5, I think I just didn't have the context. But as a child, a teen, young adult, I didn't have capacity. I was numb to that loss. Life was so unmanageable, I couldn't handle anything else. So I didn't mourn. And frankly, those deaths stuck in my being. I'm not going to use technical language for what I mean by that, but I held on to them. And I wasn't aware of that until much later. But they stuck. They stuck in my being. And frankly, my inability to mourn and the way that that loss stuck for me among many, many other losses, not just those, not just death. But the way that that loss stuck with me came between me and the one. It was like scar tissue. It was like a hardening. But how do I know this? I'm not saying this because I read it in a book. I'm not saying this because I was told that that's what I was doing. I'm telling you because last year, after a lot of healing in my early 40s, early to mid 40s, real healing, permanent, deep healing, I experienced the first loss after all that healing happened. My grandfather passed, probably one of the biggest influences on my life, my dad's father. And I wondered what would happen. I knew things were different here internally, but I wondered what would happen. And I spoke with him just before he died. It was coming, it was expected, it wasn't a sudden thing. And I wept. I never wept from a death. Never. I wept. Before he was still alive at this time, but it was near the end. I wept. And then I wept some more. In that moment, I'm talking a single moment in time, get off the phone with him and I cried. And that crying became weeping. It's like a sheet of tears coming down. And then everything broke loose inside. All that I'd been holding on to, all that lack of mourning from all the earlier deaths, it all came forward. It all dumped at once. I actually lied down on the ground. I was in my sunroom at the time, lived in a different house, and it poured out of me. I wept, lying on the ground, weeping, mourning, really mourning for the first time in my life, really mourning for the first time in my life related to a death. I mourned. Um, we're talking about death here. I had mourned, and the healing process was filled with mourning for how much I had suffered, and really held on to things I didn't need to hold on to. But here, even before he actually passed, I was able to weep, to mourn freely, pouring forth. And this is the point I'm getting to. And I'm just speaking from my heart, getting out of the way, staying quiet, allowing the words to come. The word that comes to mind is surrender. I surrendered to the loss. I surrendered to the pain. I let go. So before the loss happened, and I squeezed tight. And I really mean squeeze tight. This happens in our bodies. As a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, it's something I've really sat with for a long time. In my experience, in my body, is that we often close off. So, and I do this naturally because that is the feeling. If we can sit quietly and notice what's happening in times of loss and times of pain, we clench, we squeeze, we pull everything toward the midline. In my body, it tended to pull into the chest. My anxiety in the past, which I've been freed from, it would pull into the chest, and it was like a weight of 500 pounds on my chest. And this is that scar tissue forming when I haven't allowed myself to weep, to allow myself to mourn, to allow myself to let go, to surrender to what is. I wasn't surrendering to what is. But here in that moment last year, I surrendered to the loss I felt for my grandfather. And um, it wasn't pretty. And I don't mean that as an insult or as a value judgment on what I was experiencing. I mean, externally, it wasn't neat and proper and, sitting and crying some tears with a Kleenex. This was rolling around on the ground, weeping loudly. Fortunately, living in a house, not sharing walls with anyone, I could do that without disturbing anyone. And I just let go. And it was cleansing. So mourning for me is a cleansing process of surrendering to what is. And that's another word that I use to describe God. Because like I said in the beginning of this talk, of this experience, this shared devotion, I don't use the word God as often. It has a lot of baggage associated with it for a lot of people. What is, and that could be capitalized, what is. So I don't just mean the external reality, but referencing another thing that Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within. That's not just a throwaway sentence. The kingdom of heaven is within. If there's a gospel of Jesus that I've experienced, that is the key to understanding it all. The kingdom of heaven is within. It's not a heaven beyond. It's not a heaven that we can hope for. It is right here, right now. The kingdom of heaven is within, right here, right now. But we are closed off. I am closed off. I'm closed off to the kingdom of heaven because I want to hold on. I want to clench and clamp down, and I want to know, and I want to be right, and I want to be able to tell everybody else what the truth is because I want to possess it. But in this place of stillness, there's no knowledge. Knowledge of God, meaning thinking about God. It's not necessary here in this quiet place. Yes, I'm using words, but I'm not thinking about those words. They're just coming. And this can happen internally. And frankly, in my experience, and I'm not saying this applies to everybody, I know that I'm hearing the still small voice if it's wordless, but there's a knowingness that descends. It really feels like a descending on, even on this body, but it's so much deeper than the body. But that understanding descends without words. And if you haven't experienced that, I don't think I can explain it adequately. But it's the descent of a sense of knowingness that comes down, and then the words come. The knowingness comes, and then the words come, and the words are sometimes faltering and seeking. And I envision a maze where we're kind of we've experienced the truth, and now we're trying to find our way through this maze to express those with words that ineffable truth. And my experience is the words never get there so often. And this is where the word God, I don't like to say it because direct experience of the beauty, in these words just sound so flat and worthless to express what God truly is. Not because I've been told about it and I think about it, because I get out of the way and get quiet. The words, even the word God, even the one, all the other words, what is, the words don't work in the end. But being in human bodies with human minds, we want to express, we want to communicate. We in these bodies are kind of pack animals. We belong together where two or three are gathered. We want to be together, so we use words. So I'm not saying words are a problem or bad and that we shouldn't use words, but words are where the distortion happens. Words are where the ego can take, like Lego bricks. Well, now I have words, so I can put it in words and I can build an edifice to my own ego that I share with other people and convince them of my way of thinking, specifically thinking. Why do I mourn? Get back to the topic at hand. Why do I mourn? Frankly, I mourn I'm so hesitant to say this. The words are coming and I'm actually stopping the words, but I'm going to say it anyway. I mourn because I'm stuck in a body that keeps me apparently separate from God. And I don't actually believe there's separation there. I think that's just an apparency. It's an illusion. But this is my personal mourning. I'm not saying this applies to everyone. It's me. But there's a sense of mourning that, what is this? This seems like a diversion from what's really important. All the materialism, all the desire to possess things, to live in a nice place, to go on vacations. It's a diversion. Why do I mourn? Because everything is so diffuse. The attention is so diffuse, is a better way to put it. So distracted from what's really important to me. I think Paul said, why do I do the things I don't want to do and don't do the things I want to do? Probably paraphrasing. Yes. So 2,000 years ago, a human being on the other side of the world said that. And I think all of us, I'm guessing, and I know I certainly identify with that. Why do I do the things I don't want to do and don't do the things I want to do? It's something to sit with. It's not something to think about because we're not going to figure it out. But it's, in my experience, it's because this body, this mind, this body-mind complex that I've come to think of as me over 47 years, it essentially has a mind of its own. Another word, just like the word God, the one I don't really like to use often, is ego. So I'm not going to use that so much. What I say in place of ego, because ego is another mind creation. It's something we could write about in other books upon books upon books about ego. So let's skip that. But I'm going to say it this way. That thing I've come to think of as me over 47 years, that thing I've come to think of as me for 47 years. If you sit with that, obviously, if you're not 47, be a different number. Or that thing I've come to think of as me over this lifetime. That's what I mean by ego, if I say ego. That thing seems to have a mind of its own. It wants, it wants, it wants. It's never satisfied. It is never satisfied. That's what I mourn. My heart's longing. My heart's longing, and it is satisfied so much of the time. My heart's longing is that love relationship with God, the absolute spaciousness, the connection, the love, the merging, if you will. It's here. It's always here. We're already there. But mind here. That thing I've come to think of as me over the past 47 years, it is determined not to go there because there's not much of a place for this me there. This me is not there. And I mourn for that. But I don't clench down on it, or I try not to. I relax into it. It's why there's so much meditation on this channel. It's why the physical practice of yoga is powerful. It helps stop the clenching, the squeezing that we do to try to hold on to this thing that is never going to satisfy. It's never going to satisfy. The pleasures of this body, this mind, they will never satisfy me. I know that. So I mourn for that. So all this is to say, like earlier I said, I'm going to set up what is the opposite of mourning, or what is mourning in opposition to. We use words to distinguish. So what am I distinguishing from when I use the word mourning? I'm distinguishing from the death grip I hold on reality, the unwillingness to acknowledge my powerlessness. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who surrender to what is, recognizing their powerlessness, weeping if weeping is what's needed. Blessed are those who relax into the spaciousness of what is instead of trying to form a shell and capture what is right now, or what was, I should say, yesterday, what was an hour ago, instead of trying to clamp down and capture something. Being here in this ever present, spacious, pregnant moment that is so beautiful and such a gift. Mourning is about letting go of what wants to stick, what I want to stick, because I want to be powerful. I want to be something. I want to know. Mourning is the process of letting go and recognizing the grief that comes with that letting go. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you so much. Feel free to email or message.